Oh, hey,
Hey, nice to see
Jackie.
you on the astral plane that is the internet.
I know, right? Fancy meeting you here. Who would have thunk?
Oh,
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second installment of the New York City Poetry Festival streaming reading series. I'm Stephanie Berger, the CEO of the Poetry Society of New York. This lovely human is Jackie Brage, our programs director, and we're very excited to be here. So this series of events is basically all about trying to kind of conjure some of the magic of the New York City Poetry Festival, which we had to cancel this summer. For those of you unfamiliar with the festival, it is free and open to the public. It's a weekend-long event. It's all outdoors on Governor's Island, which is kind of a magical place. And we basically partner with over 100 poetry organizations and collectives of all shapes and sizes. And they bring readings and workshops and literary art installations and book selling and all kinds of other activities to the festival grounds. And it's really fun. And we just wanted to kind of like capture some of that. So we decided to partner with some of our favorite poetry organizations to bring you some streaming readings this summer. And tonight we have partnered with Copper Canyon, who's actually genuinely one of my favorite presses. What about you, Jackie?
So I never picked up a book that has disappointed me from Copper Canyon, truly.
Yeah, truly. And so Copper Canyon, they were founded in 1972. They've published over 400 titles of poetry, and they publish Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, National Book Award winners. No big deal. And of course, tonight's readers, Leila Chatti and Alberto Rios and Victoria Chang. So each of our readers tonight will read to us, and then we'll follow the readings with a little Q&A section. So, Joey Gold, hi. So if you, I'm sorry, I just saw Joey's comment. Hey, Joey. Joey, so if you have any questions for like Alberto or Leila or Victoria during this event, you or anyone else who's watching can post your questions in the comments, and we will do our best to address those questions during the Q&A. And if you run into any connectivity issues or anything during the event, I also just want everyone to know, like right off the bat, that this video will be posted in full on our Facebook page after the event. So don't fret if you miss something. Cool. I don't know, Jackie, did I forget anything?
Well, I know this is a hard thing to mention during COVID times and during just everything in general times, but we are also accepting donations throughout the night to help make next year's festival possible. We'll drop a link in the comments shortly, but you can go to NewYorkCityPoetryFestival.com/donate if you feel moved to do so. I think that was it, right?
Yeah, I think that's like basically everything. Let's introduce our first reader. Let's just do it.
First we have Leila Chatti. Leila is a Tunisian-American poet and author of Deluge, which recently came out in this spectacular collection, and the chapbooks Ebb and Tunisia-American, the 2017 editor selection from Bull City Press. Her honors include a Pushcart Prize, grants from the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund and the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation, and fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, the Wisconsin Institute for Creative Writing, and Cleveland State University, where she was the inaugural Anisfield-Wolf Fellow in Publishing and Writing. She's currently pursuing a PhD in creative writing at the University of Cincinnati, where she is a Provost Fellow. The poems appear in really small publications like the New York Times Magazine, Ploughshares, Tin House, American Poetry Review, etc. Hi, Leila.
Hi. Oh, well, this is so exciting. I'm so excited to virtually be with you all my last day in my hometown before I head down to Cincinnati, actually. I'm excited to read for you. So I'm just going to go pretty much straight through. But before I read the first poem, I'd like to give like a little explanation. The book is about a time in my early 20s where I was very sick, and I guess it's about more than that. It spread sort of in both directions. But during that time, I returned to scripture, and what I found there was very interesting, but this was sort of the quote that really kicked off the collection. And it's in the scene where Mary is giving birth to Jesus, and in the Quran, she's in the desert, and she says, "I wish I had died before this, and was in oblivion, forgotten." Confession. Truth be told, I like Mary a little better when I imagine her like this, crouched and cursing, a boy god pushing on her cervix. I like remembering she had a cervix, her body ordinary and so like mine. Girl sweat lacing rivulets like veins in the sand, her small hands on her knees, not doves, but hands, gripping, a palm pressed to her spine, fronds whispering coiffures overhead. Oh, Mary, like a god, I too take pleasure in knowing you were not all holy that ache could undo you like a knot. And suffering, I admire this girl who cared for a moment not about God or his plans, but her own distinct life. This fiercer Mary who'd disappear if it saved her, who'd howl to hell with salvation if it meant this pain, the blessed adolescent who squatted indignant in a desert, bearing his child like a secret she never wanted to hear. Sarcoma. When the doctor says the word sarcoma, I consider how it might be a nice name for a daughter. That good feminine A. The way parents name their children for all sorts of inappropriate things. Apples, for instance, or the place where the baby was conceived. And I trace my fingers over the barrow of my belly as he speaks, flesh distended beneath the blue tissue I wear for a dress, an ideal grief frock, throwaway. And he says something about life expectancy, but of course I expect my life. So plain I thought nothing would ever take it. And while he explains, I cup my palms around my center, as if comforting a child, or covering her ears. Litany while reading scripture in the gynecologic oncology waiting room. And God said, let there be blood. And God said, flood. And God said, good is a woman with fruit in her womb and not in her hand. And God said, sin. And God did not say, forgive. And God said, I will make a stormy wind. And God said, sun, a breath stirring. And God said, highly favored. And God said, condemned. And God said, I will blot out men whom I have created, for I am sorry that I have made them. And God said, listen, and sank a boy in her like a stone. Mother. If you had asked me, 13, what I wanted to be one day, I wouldn't have said it. I wanted, for a long time, to be anything but myself, knew that a soon-to-be woman was the second worst thing in the world after a woman, full stop, and I was heading there fast. I could see it, my breasts rudely nudging into view, their snug caps like the knit caps of infants, rosy-colored as a tongue. And how terrifying, the thought of a mouth there, rooting, and what could be drawn from me that I didn't need. What else skulked in me unseen, stirring in secret vats with milk yet untapped and blood, the strange new wellspring? I was just beginning to understand the possibilities. My body's elusive independent workings, machineries chugging away in dark chambers, not just left to, but simply their own devices, unknowable and sovereign. What I wanted always to be. in control. And I knew this was impossible, just as I knew, even then, that to be a mother was to be the only permissible form of a woman, the begrudging exception to the rule of her worthlessness. So if you asked me again, 23, I tell you the worst thing you could be is not a woman, but barren, the industry shut down and the parts missing, malformed. And I tell you the shame of it, the feminine failure, its ache, a reminder. At the center, the tumor, ballooning, like hope. Angel. After a month of asking, suddenly a voice. It says you deserve that which has happened to you. It says, I see what you do with your long, terrene hands. Maundering through the banalities of my life, it follows, speaking, as if from a frosty bag of peas in the freezer aisle, speaking, while I am on my knees, scrubbing the bathroom floor, trying to love a man. Its speech is disquieting company, but company nonetheless. The TV left on and turned low. It desperately wants my attention, but is polite, which is its defining weakness. Sometimes I catch it stirring out of the corner of my eye, a glint at the end of my cat's whiskers, a spangle on the ceiling of indiscernible source. More often, though, it looks like me, only a little off, like my reflection in the pregnant belly of a spoon. In fact, when I speak to it, I use my own name. I'm not sure if it minds. It repeats instead its refrain. It says, God has plans for you. It says, I didn't say they were good. Hymen. Second blood, I never knew you. After the first, scoured the bed for your blazoned blot and came up empty. Perhaps I was born without you. A box with no prize inside, a sundae with no cherry on top. God of good girls, God of matrimony, mother state, which I consider a distant country with a discordant tongue, did you speak with God and conclude I hadn't use for you? Once I was small as your kin. So small and for such a long time, longer than I've lived, I fit inside my mother when she fit inside her mother, and so on and so forth, and further, a nest of matrons, knees and a beam in which to be female is to be something like infinity, and was it determined then what kind of woman I would be? It seems I've always been frightened, little veil, of wedlock's lock, clicking shut. The heritable procession of women whispering in the aisles, my pulse, don't do, don't do, don't. And I haven't done. This, the grave of men, the grave I've dug with the spade of pleasure. But wanting seal of want, I did, wanted, did choose to commit my life's greatest transgression with a benevolent accomplice, and so in the here before you could say I'm among the spared. What a mess this messlessness of you could have been in any number of lives my size, billowing specters of dresses on a line of possibility, lives in which I am the bridesmaid and you, maidenhead, the bride given away, where I am the acquired property and you the red ribbon severed in the threshold, I the purse and you the coin tendered. Perhaps no one ever told you, precious emblem of innocence, simulacrum for honor, that some believe you the most important part of me, vital, like a heart a man gets the thrill of bursting where he can see it, that blood is owed to him. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? Of a woman, you, the only blood worth anything. Testimony. There is a God, and there is no God but him. He has many names and answers to none. On the day of judgment, I will be called by my name and by the name of my Father. My name, the dark I was forged in, dark which rehearses his return while I sleep. Indeed, one day I will return to God as it is to him that I belong. Indeed, this was part of the message, and the message was received. I do not speak for God, and he does not speak to me. This is an estrangement. When asked my religion, I answer, surrender. I pray with my head to the floor, with my hands where he can see them, with both eyes closed. All this for paradise, which lies at the feet of mothers. Beneath my feet, the temporal earth, which darkens where I stand. Annunciation. All night I leak a shadow from the place I first learned shame. All night the milky curve of the moon pressed to the window like an ear. God, I know you are there. You are everywhere. And yet you fixed her in a shaft of light and sent a man who would not touch her, frightened though she was. You were there in the room, as you are here in the room, in the dark through which I beseech you. The man beside me slumbers messageless, unwinged. All night I listen for you listening. If there is something you need to tell me, God, you must tell it to me yourself. I'm going to read one last one. Thank you for being here tonight, wherever here is for you. Exegesis. I bled. God didn't want to hear about it. He said unclean, and so it was. He said it is harm, and so it was. Want to hear about it? He said unclean. Once a woman wanted, so he did her harm. And so it was first conceived, a woman suffering because a woman wanted. So he said cursed, and then he said blessed. The woman chose to suffer, conceived a God, though she never knew a man. And God knows best. If he calls a curse a blessing, then so it is. And he said she was clean. She never knew a man. I've known men, but never a God that bled and lived. But I did. Thank you.
Ah, so good. Wow.
Thank you. I'm so happy you read the exegesis poem. I love that. I remember that one like really succinctly from reading your book.
Holy bananas. That was so delightful. I just, I love your voice. Is that okay to say? Is that weird? It was just so beautiful. Our last reading that we did like this, Erica Meitner was talking about, walking. She was like, earlier I was like walking through the woods, listening to a reading series, like watching a streaming series, like on her phone, walking through the woods. I was just like hoping that she was watching this right now in the woods. It was like her voice in the woods. It would be so amazing. Anyways, thank you so much, Leila. You're incredible. All right. So enough fangirling for now. Alberto Rios is our next poet, Arizona's inaugural poet laureate and a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. He is the author of 11 collections of poetry, including The Smallest Muscle in the Human Body, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. His most recent book is A Small Story About the Sky, preceded by The Dangerous Shirt, such a good title, and The Theater of Night, which received the Pen Beyond Margins Award. I'm like, a dangerous shirt. Published in the New Yorker, the Paris Review, Ploughshares, and other journals, he has also written 3 short story collections and a memoir about growing up on the Mexican border. Rios is also the host of the PBS program Books & Co., University Professor of Letters, Regents Professor, and the Catherine C. Turner Chair in English. Rios has taught at Arizona State University for over 35 years. In 2017, he was named director of the Virginia G. Piper Center for Creative Writing. Please welcome Alberto Rios.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction, Steph. Wild days. I know, we all know. And I have to say, I'm just glad to be able to be here with all of you. These are extraordinary times, and I think the call to poets, as the call to architects, and the call to doctors, and the call to anybody else is now is the time. I'm going to start. I actually have a newer book called Not Go Away Is My Name. And I'm going to read some poems from that tonight. I'm starting with a poem about that came from living on the border. And I think that's something to me that feels like getting, it's just disappearing in all of this news. It's disappearing. But the border itself has not gone anywhere. This is called I Do Not Go Away. You have terror, and I have tears. In this cruel way, we are for each other. We're at war. You always win, but I do not go away. You shoot me again. Again, I do not go away. You shoot with bullets, but you have nothing else. I fight back. I shoot you with fragments of childhood where you played the hero. I shoot you with memories of your mother and your little sister, Maritza. I shoot you with spring and the rolling mountains and the taste of plantain bananas and sugar. You do not fall down dead. You can kill me, where all I can do is hold up the mirror of remembering to you, the mirror of everything you have done. You set fire to me with gasoline. I set fire to you with the memory of your first love. You cut my hands off. I cut your hands off with the way you saw them disappear when you were diving into the warm water of the lake the summer of swimming with your brother. Do you remember the names of the left for dead, the damaged, the hounded, the hurt? Do you remember my name? Your fist is hard. My name is crying. You strike a match. My name is cringe. You lift your foot. My name is pain. You wake up. My name is closed eyes. Your smile mimics the size of the opening on the side of a head, a crude opening that a mean needle will stitch up tonight. Your arm laughs at me with its muscle. All this, all these tears you have made, this water you have found in the desert, all this blood you have drawn from the bodies of so many who needed it. You win. You have always won. All I can do is not go away. Not go away is my name. I'm going to follow that with a poem that when I wrote it meant something very different than what's happened since the pandemic. This is called Don't Go Into the Library. The library is dangerous. Don't go in. If you do, you know what will happen. It's like a pet store or a bakery. Every single time you'll come out of there holding something in your arms. Those novels with their big eyes and wagging tails, those no-nonsense, all-muscle Dobermans, all nonfiction and business, cuddly when they're young, but then the first page is turned and no turning back. and those sleek, fast, beautiful greyhounds, poems, the donut scent of it all, knowledge, the aroma of coffee being made in all those books, something for everyone, the deli offerings of civilization itself. The library is the book of books. Its concrete and wood and glass covers, keeping within them the very big, very strong, long story of everything. The library is dangerous, full of answers. If you go inside, you may not come out the same person who went in. Follow that with a poem to our younger humans. I work with a lot of young people, and I would like to read this for them. This is called A House Called Tomorrow. You are not 15 or 12 or 17. You are 100 wild centuries and 15, bringing with you in every breath and in every step everyone who has come before you, all the yous that you have been, the mothers of your mother, the fathers of your father. If someone in your family tree was trouble, 100 were not. The bad do not win, not finally, no matter how loud they are. We simply would not be here if that were so. You are made fundamentally from the good. With this knowledge, you never march alone. You are the breaking news of the century. You are the good who has come forward through it all, even if so many days feel otherwise. But think, when you as a child learned to speak, it's not that you didn't know words. It's that from the centuries, you knew so many. And it's hard to choose the words that will be your own. From those centuries, we human beings bring with us the simple solutions and songs, the river bridges and star charts and song harmonies, all in service to a simple idea that we can make a house called tomorrow. What we bring finally into the new day, every day, is ourselves. And that's all we need to start. That's everything we require to keep going. Look back only for as long as you must. Then go forward into the history you will make. Be good, then better. Write books, cure disease, make us proud. Make yourself proud. And those who came before you, when you hear thunder, hear it as their applause. Well, I don't think we're the only beings in the universe. So let me just read a poem to that effect. This is called The Secret in the Mirror. The mirror is dirty from the detritus of dailiness. I look in the mirror and am suddenly freckled. A week out from being cleaned, maybe two, maybe more, the Milky Way shows itself in the secret silver. This star chart in my own bathroom. A glow not in darkness, but with the lights on, everything suddenly so clear. It is not smear I'm looking at, but galaxies. It is not toothpaste and water spots. When I look in the mirror, it is writing and numbers, musical notes, ones and zeros, Morse-like codes, runes. I am looking over into the other side. And over there, whoever they are, it turns out they look a lot like me, but freckled. Let me finish with this poem. This is a hopeful poem, I think. Scary times, I don't know what you do with them. And I don't know why we do this to each other. This is called We Are of a Tribe. We plant seeds in the ground and dreams in the sky, hoping that someday the roots of one will meet the upstretched limbs of the other. It has not happened yet. We share the sky, all of us, the whole world. Together, we are a tribe of eyes that look upward, even as we stand on uncertain ground. The earth beneath us moves, quiet and wild, its boundaries shifting, its muscles wavering. The dream of sky is indifferent to all this, impervious to borders, fences, reservations. The sky is our common home, the place we all live. There we are in the world together. The dream of sky requires no passport. Blue will not be fenced. Blue will not be a crime. Look up. Stay a while. Let your breathing slow. Know that you always have a home here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alberto.
The sky is impervious to borders. I'm going to remember that one for the rest of quarantine for sure.
Totally. So many great, just beautiful, like quotable, like poignant lines that I want to hold on to forever.
Uplifting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. I can't wait for the Q&A. I don't know about you. So I can't believe it's time for our last reader already. How did this happen? Time flies when you're having fun.
I know. I'd love to introduce her.
Please do.
So next we have Victoria Chang. Victoria's books include Obit, Barbie Chang, The Boss, Salvinia Molesta, and Circle, which are like easily all of the best book titles that I could think of. Her children's picture book, Is Mommy, was illustrated by Marla Frazee and published by Beach Lane Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, I believe. It was named a New York Times notable book. Her middle grade novel, Love, Love, will be published by Sterling Publishing in 2020. She has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Sustainable Arts Foundation Award, the Poetry Society of America's Alice Faye D. Castanola Award, a Pushcart Prize, and a McDowell Colony Fellowship. She lives in LA and is the program chair of Antioch's Low Residency MFA program. Please welcome Victoria.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? I guess you can't really answer me, so I'll assume you can. Thank you so much to the Poetry Society of New York. It was such a pleasure to hear Leila and Alberto read, and it's such an honor to read with you. Thank you to Stephanie, Jackie, Saki, and anyone else who had a hand in planning this, because I know it probably takes a lot of work. And thanks, as always, to Copper Canyon Press. I'm just going to read a few poems. And I just want to shout out to a few people I see in the chat. Hi, Kelly. Hi, Eduardo. And I think I know Sadiq from social media. And I think it's really neat how there's someone from Australia here. So I think that's one of the pros of the quarantine, if there are any, that someone could be from Australia watching us. So I'm going to read from this new book. It's called Obit, and it was published just recently by Copper Canyon Press. And it's just a book that I wrote shortly after my mother passed away from pulmonary fibrosis, which is a lung disease where you basically, your lungs harden and then you gradually suffocate to death. My dad had a stroke maybe about 12 years ago, so he kind of appears in and out in this collection as well. And I didn't really want to write these traditional elegies. And so I heard the word obit on NPR one day talking about a documentary about obituaries. And I just started writing these little obituaries where everything dies. I'll just read a few, and I'll start with Memory. Memory died August 3rd, 2015. The death was not sudden, but slowly over a decade. I wonder if, when people die, they hear a bell, or if they taste something sweet, or if they feel a knife cutting them in half, dragging through the flesh like sheet cake. The caretaker who witnessed my mother's death quit. She holds the memory and images, and now they are gone. For the rest of her life, the memories are hers. She said my mother couldn't breathe, then took her last breath 20 seconds later. The way I have imagined a kiss with many men I have never kissed. My memory of my mother's death can't be a memory, but is an imagination. Each time the wind blows, leaves unfurl a little differently. This one is called Friendships. Friendships died June 24th, 2009, once beloved, but not consistently beloved. The mirror won the battle. I am now imprisoned in the mirror, all myself spread out like a deck of cards. It's true. The grieving speak a different language. I am separated from my friends by gauze. I'll drive myself to my own house for the party. I'll make small talk with myself, spill a drink on myself. When it's over, I'll drive myself back to my own house. My conversations with other parents about children pass me on the way up the staircase and repeat on the way down. Before my mother's death, I sat anywhere. Now I look for the image of the empty chair near the image of the empty table. An image is a kind of distance. An image of me sits down. Depression is a glove over the heart. Depression is an image of a glove over the image of a heart. Hi, Jordan. I always look at the chat because I worry that no one can hear me and I'm the only one that knows that until I'm all done reading. So just make sure if you can't hear me or something's wrong, just type it in the chat. This one's called Grief. Grief as I knew it died many times. It died trying to reunite with other lesser deaths. Each morning, I lay out my children's clothing to cover their grief. The grief remains, but is changed by what it is covered with. A picture of oblivion is not the same as oblivion. My grief is not the same as my pain. My mother was a mathematician, so I tried to calculate my grief. My father was an engineer, so I tried to build a box around my grief, along with a small wooden bed that grief could lie down on. The text kept interrupting my grief, forcing me to speak about nothing. If you cut out a rectangle of a perfectly blue sky, no clouds, no wind, no birds, frame it with a blue frame, place it face up on the floor of an empty museum with an open atrium to the sky, that is grief. So I wrote about 75 of these over 2 weeks. I don't remember sleeping very much, and I was sort of just in a big happy days or sad days, I don't know. And then I sort of started writing these formal poems, so sonnets, sestinas, just to sort of do something different. I started writing tankas, which are a Japanese syllabic form of 5, 7, 5, 7, 7, 31 syllables total. And I just started writing them to children, my children, all children, and they put them in little pairs. I don't know why, don't ask me. Can you see that? Yeah. So I'm just going to read 4 of them. So I'll read 2 pairs. Do you see the tree? Its secrets grow as lemons. Sometimes I pretend I love my children more than words. No one knows this but words. My children, children, today my hands are dreaming as they touch your hair. Your hair turns into winter. When I die, your hair will snow. I'll read 2 more of these, and I just sprinkle them throughout the book. I tell my children that hope is like a blue skirt. It can twirl and twirl, that men like to open it, take it apart, and wound it. I tell my children that sometimes I too can hope, that sometimes nothing moves but my love for someone and the light from the dead star. So I'll read maybe a few more of these obits. I also wrote these things in the middle, and they're elegies, but they look like this, and they have a lot of space between them. I won't read them because they're really hard to read, but I put them in the middle of the book. This one's called The Bees. I don't know if I've ever read this one before. I'll read it today. It's called The Bees. 268 million years old from the Philippines passed away on April 26, 2217 in Nome, Alaska. The detaching icebergs crushed the bees who used to fly over conference rooms. Once I nearly died in a small plane with a CEO, CFO, and COO during their IPO. On the ground, the CEO glared at me as if I had caused the storm, as if the yellow lights had come from my mind, as if the buzzing had come from my shaking, as if the lightning were a box I had tripped over. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had become estranged from a part of myself that wanted to stay alive, that wanted them to remain alive. In the same way, I had become estranged from my mother forever, but not from her death. Maybe I'll read, I don't know if I have time to read 2 more. I don't know, I wasn't timing myself. I'm sorry, I forgot to turn my watch on. This one's called The Blue Dress. The blue dress died on August 6, 2015, along with the little blue flowers, all silent. Once the petals looked up, now small pieces of dust. I wonder whether they burned the dress or just the body. I wonder who lifted her up into the fire. I wonder if her hair brushed his cheek before it grew into a bonfire. I wonder what sound the body made as it burned. They dyed her hair for the funeral, too black. She looked like a comic character. I waited for the next comic panel to see the speech bubble and what she might say. But her words never came, and we were left with the stillness of blown glass, the irreversibility of rain, and millions of little blue flowers. Imagination is having to live in a dead person's future. Grief is wearing a dead person's dress forever. Thank you.
So gorgeous. Thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria. I kept like wanting to jump in during your reading because that, you know, I have the ability to like jump in whenever I want on this platform. I kept wanting to jump in and just be like, keep going. You're so great. Wow. Those poems are so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Most tender little dagger to the heart.
Yeah. So, what do you say we bring our whole panel on and start the Q&A? Maybe, yeah.
Okay.
It's so nice to see all of you. I like having us all together. This is our Brady Bunch moment. We're like a happy little weird poet family. So I have questions. I would like to start by asking about how each of you go about putting together like a collection. Like I know Victoria, obviously you had like a particular motive and then wrote this like very kind of like conscious, I guess, series of poems with Obit. Alberto, I know you've written, I believe in your bio, it says 11 collections of poetry. How do you go about like putting together a collection? It's like a poem is a poem, but a book of poems, what is it?
Yeah, well, Leila too, it reads like one long narrative almost.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I can just start, I think I trust the human brain, and I know that a collection in so many ways puts itself together. I think I know best, but I don't know that that's accurate. I think the things that I write, which sometimes seem so disparate, in point of fact are not. And that's most often pointed out to me when I'm writing something very human, and suddenly I'll write a poem about trees or animals, and it seems entirely disconnected, but juxtaposed with the other things, it absolutely is not. It helps me remember that I live in a world of all things, not just the human presence. And so I like to think that what I'm writing is a result of some collection wanting to be made, that it's asking to be part of this next grouping, and I trust that.
Cool, great answer. Leila, will you tell us about your thoughts on that?
Yeah. When I started the book, I didn't realize I was writing a book. I was in my MFA in the period that I was sick, so the period at the center of the book, and so I was just writing poems about my experience, like specifically about being sick as I was sick, as a way to make sense of what was happening to me. But I didn't have sort of a vision of them doing anything. I actually had been told sort of specifically that no one would really be interested in reading a book about women's bodies and infertility and things like that. So I had this very anti-book thought about my poems, and that, you know, this was just what I was doing, I guess, for practice, and then I would write my real book later. And it wasn't until, like, you know, a year or so out after my final surgery and graduation that my mentor Dorian pointed out to me that no, in fact, I was writing my book. I had been, you know, accumulated about 15 poems that were thematically all linked, and it was sort of my task to figure out what else. What are the other questions now that I'm allowing myself to think that way? And so I'm an obsessive sort of person, and I'm a very project-oriented person. So I had, you know, notebooks and full of notes from all sorts of texts that I read. I did a lot of research. My den was just covered in like papers, and I collected all these Marys. There's like 5 Marys on my desk right now that you can't see. So I really just like kind of stayed with my obsession until it revealed to me what was sparking that obsession. And then it kind of pushed me out. Like when I finished the final book, or the final poem of the book, which is the final poem, that there was like a weird feeling, like something had just left me, and I couldn't go back into that book if I wanted to. So it kind of showed up without me knowing, and then left without me knowing. Like I didn't have a lot of say. I just kind of followed what was given to me, I guess.
Right. So it was kind of intuitive, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Figuring something out. Yeah.
What would you say, Victoria?
You know, I think my process probably sounds like a lot of other people's process. And, you know, I think that you just put one foot in front of the other in a dark cave and you hope for the best. And, you know, I think that's the beauty of writing, is the mystery of not knowing what you're doing or what will come next, and wending and winding along as the poem sort of takes you along. So my process was very similar. Yeah, I mean, I had no idea what I was doing in those few weeks. And frankly, I still don't know what I'm doing, but I think that yeah, I didn't really know I was writing a book. I didn't know I was writing poems. They didn't look like this until much later. And they're just in a notebook that reached the end and just were written. I lineate after. So I know some people write and lineate at the same time, but I just sort of just write like a journal, like a free, just all the way through. It just no line breaks. And so yeah, I think that was my process. And I love that process of not knowing. And I think that is probably the most fun thing about writing. It's so mysterious. Yeah. But putting the book together, I mean, I just wrote an essay about how to put a book together. And the conclusion is there's no way. It's just sort of like you can consider a lot of things and have an inquiry-based approach. But I do think you have to ask each thing that you're working on what shape it wants to take, and also understanding that right now, if you were to write a book here in this space, it would be different than if you were in a different city or if you were 2 years later. And knowing that is sort of scary, but also kind of exciting.
Definitely.
That's sort of a non-answer.
I mean, it's fair. It's kind of it's an honest answer, which I appreciate.
I guess a semi-related question for everyone that I like to just put on the floor. So I'm curious about like what subjects, ideas, or themes have you been really drawn to lately? Or maybe more interestingly, if certain subjects and themes are consistent for you, then how have those been altered in recent months? And like open that up.
I've been thinking a lot in fragments. I've been very interested in sort of like poems that get started and not finished, or sort of like the feeling of things being undone. And I think that it's because my attention's been so fragmentary with everything that's going on, but I'm also interested in sort of rejecting some of my need to have so much control over something, and sort of having just pieces of things and kind of gleaning what I need from pieces. So from literally cutting up things into fragments, or just sort of catching language as it's coming to me and sort of putting it together and not needing to like tie off the ending. So I'm interested in small poems and poems of pieces, if that makes sense. I don't know if there's like a subject specifically, but just like wispy little, like something got caught on a thread or thorn or something, and there's like a little piece of a poem. That's kind of what I'm interested in.
For me, I've been thinking a lot about heroicism, but not in any classical way. Just Victoria, you were saying about writing a book, you put one foot in front of another. Well, just how do we as human beings put one foot in front of another, period? And in these days of so much need in so many arenas, it's harder to understand the complexity of forward movement, and scarier to think that there may be other kinds of movement around us. And I don't know what that even means, but I've only ever thought in terms of forward movement, but it's hard to fathom how we as human beings can keep persevering. And I saw it in my own parents moving forward. I saw it in people around me, and I'm seeing it now as people are just dealing with things. Now, heroicism, all I mean by that is at its very basic level, just moving on, moving next. Now, it sounds really dire, and I don't mean it quite that way, but at its heart, I do. So heroicism.
Awesome. Victoria, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I think I like Leila. Have been writing tiny little poems. I've been working on essays. I have this collection of essays coming out, and so I've just been obsessing over those. I don't know. I feel like it's just, I've been thinking a lot about how isolated we are, but how our pain is also isolated. So I know everyone's in pain, but I can't feel the pain. I can't see the pain. And I can visually see it, but I can't really see it. So it's a very strange space to be in. And I guess for me, just that there's not a clear ending of where things will be. And yet also, you know, it's a privilege to even talk about endings because so many people have their endings, they're dying. It's just such a strange time of paradox. So maybe to kind of think about that, it's just this time of paradox, you know. But yeah, I mean, I've just been reading a lot and writing a lot, and I'm super busy, so I don't have a lot of time to consider and think. And this is probably the longest today I've had a chance to sort of think about these questions. So yeah, I think that I feel also guilty if I have a happy moment, or if I'm enjoying something, even if it's that I'm having a piece of sheet cake that I'm enjoying, is I'm not allowed to enjoy this right now, you know? So there's a lot of guilt too, I think. I'm alive, you know, I'm alive. And that's a gift right now. So yeah, those are some of the things I've been thinking about.
Yeah. Nobody asked me anything, but I just want to say really quickly that, you know, I have like a handful of people in my life that I show poems to, and like I've shown my recent poetry to some people, and they've been saying that my poems are like more coherent and cohesive and like understandable and accessible than they've ever been. And normally my work is really fragmented. So I think that's just kind of interesting how like different people respond to this situation, which is very strange. I'm gonna post Annie's question right here, which is for Victoria. Annie asks, I am curious how the decision was made in Obit to write your own obituaries, and how writing those poems or any of the Obit poems was different than work you've done before.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is building on what everyone else was saying about decisions. I don't know if we can even call them decisions. They just sort of happen. And it's also hard to look back on those times and think, but I think mostly things, I left them kind of in order, and then I kind of messed around with it. So I guess maybe it's the third poem was Victoria Chang. And yes, I look at this and I think it was probably one of the earlier ones. And so probably pretty soon. I mean, and I've said this many times before, but you know, when someone you care about dies, everything dies. And I think it's also different when you have someone that dies maybe really suddenly. It's a different kind of death, you know. But my mother she was sick for so long, and then my father got sick and he's still alive, but for so long that it is just little fragments of things dying, which is different, I think, than, again, like a sudden passing. So yeah, I mean, I think when my dad had a stroke and my mother passed, there's parts of you die. Language that you have together dies. Little looks that you share die. A whole countries for me died. My whole history died because there's so many things I don't know about that I can't ask anymore. And my mother was my tie to my cultural history. And I never asked her that many questions. So there's so much I don't know. And so I think, yeah, I think that came pretty quickly. And the other part, I love how you can just drag that over. I only use Zoom. So this is all new experience for me. I'm actually kind of excited.
I know StreamYard's amazing, right?
It's different. It's so different. Yeah. And then any Obit were different than, yeah, I mean, I hope all my work still, people say it kind of still sounds like me, whatever that means. I'm a totally optimistic person in person, but in my work, I think can be a little bit down and sad. So I don't know. I think that we age and we grow, and for me, I'm very impatient and also get bored very easily. I'm a Sagittarius, and so you know, God forbid I write something the same as before, and so that would just drive me insane. But I do look. It appears to be very obsessive and write very similar forms in one book, and so. Yeah, I hope it's different than all the stuff I've written. I hope the new stuff continues to be super different, because that's just the kind of person that I am disposition wise. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to bring up another question from Eduardo. Eduardo asked, for Tito, has your writing practice changed over the years? If so, how?
Yeah, that's a great question. And hi to Eduardo. By the way, Tito, for anybody, is my nickname that I've grown up with ever since I was a kid. I had the same name as my father, Alberto, and so I was Albertito. That shortens to what my grandmother called me, which was Betito, and that becomes either Beto or Tito, and I'm Tito. So that's where that comes from. Eduardo, this is a great question, because it's an act of incredible self-examination, and it's not that it's hard to admit anything, just it's strange. But I know that when I first started writing, it was all intuitive. I didn't come from writing. I didn't come from reading. I didn't come from the written arts. I came from told stories. And so my sense of even how to go to school had very little to do with school. And it took me a long time to understand that. And so I was not, on paper, I would not have been a good candidate, I don't think, for going forward in the educational system. But that meant that when I first started writing, it was something from deep inside. It wasn't from the outside. And in that sense, I think that's the definition of intuitive. I wrote the only thing I knew how to write, which didn't come from classic literature, didn't come from other poets, didn't come from anything except the life and lives around me. That intuitiveness over my early career, it changed. I got more serious about what I was doing. I got smarter about what I was doing. You can't help it. I was reading more about it. I was reading more, period. And I think the intuitiveness of the early years, which I really love in retrospect, because I don't understand half of what I was trying to reach for, got smarter in the middle years, and I think became a little bit more, not dogmatic, but a little bit more structured, a little bit more studied, and what I probably perceived of as being a little smarter. And it took me a while, last 2 decades, to kind of not reject that, but embrace it and go beyond it and try to find that intuitiveness again. And I think that's what I've changed back now to, is I think I have the embrace of the high seriousness, but I don't ever exhibit it that way. And so I think I've got an intuitiveness back. I leap for whatever needs to be leapt toward. And I don't think I follow the dictates of anything but that. And I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And I think that's maybe the telltale sign. I'm having fun doing it. And it seems to work for me. So.
Awesome. Yeah. I love it when writing is fun. That's like the best kind.
What do you think led you back to like reuniting with your intuition in your writing?
Well, I started to see where the other was kind of going, and it started to feel like I wasn't writing myself. And I have a great love of forms only because they seem to accomplish something. And I embraced that wholeheartedly in those middle years. I was just writing forms, and it seemed like a wonderful, if it seemed like a wonderful way to brace yourself as you walked. It told you where to walk, how far you could walk, when you were done. And that seems to me ultimately, or it started to feel anti-intuitive. It was some other voice from some other place telling me about the piece I was writing. And so I think I took the instruction of formalism and tried to find a way to intuitivize it. And if it ended up being X number of syllables, or it worked in a particular rhyme, great. But since I was working between cultures and between languages and between physical places, those had to ultimately be a starting point, not an ending point. And so I think that's where I diverged from that. and incorporated it, took the lessons, but absolutely did not let that be the landing place.
Cool. I'm going to bring up Elaine's question, which I think is for everybody, but I'd love to start with Leila on this one. If the writing of a poem is especially emotional, does the reading of it, even over time, still provoke the same strong emotions?
That's a great question. Oh, sorry, my computer just went weird. Okay.
I was curious about your answer in particular because I felt like when you were reading your poems, you have this like really gorgeous, like delicate voice in the way that you read, but I could sense this like anger underneath it. And I think that there are definitely like, there's definitely a lot of, anger in some of the poems that you read for us today. And yeah, so I'm curious about how that emotion comes up for you when you're kind of performing work that you've maybe kind of long, I don't know, dismissed or something.
I think it's something I've been thinking about a lot. Ultimately the pandemic flattened my tour entirely, but like before then I'd been sort of like gearing up to be like, okay, I'm going to be inhabiting this headspace for a year actively, constantly thinking about those poems and what it felt like to go through that. And writing the book certainly made it feel more manageable. I feel like for a number of years, certainly while I was in it, there was the direct sort of suffering and fear, which is why there's certain poems that I could only write when I was sick, and there's only certain poems I could only write after that. I needed both. But there was a lot of feelings that went into that book. And when I finished it, I felt a sense of relief, as if I put it into a box maybe, but also a sense of dread, because now I sort of had it in this form that could be opened up by anybody, and that I would know where to find it, I guess. And so anytime I really wanted to go back in, there it is, distilled. And so it does bring up feelings. And it's interesting to me because sometimes I read the same poem like 20 times and I'll be fine. And then suddenly the 21st time, there's something that upsets me. And I think whenever I get ready to do a reading, I do sort of get back into that headspace, sort of like really paying attention to what I'm saying and not just, reciting from memory or something, but actually thinking about what I felt and what it meant to write those poems. And so many of them for me were like prayers, and I don't use that as some sort of like gimmick. I come from a lot of faith, and so I did have a lot of real anger toward God and anger toward men and anger toward my doctors that hasn't gone away. And the book doesn't really resolve that. It sort of ends ambiguous in terms of if I resolve those feelings or not. So some days those feelings are coming up more than others as my life didn't just end. I say that there was a period of my life, but I'm still dealing with a lot of the same things. So sometimes it feels strange to be like in an echo of what happened 5-7 years ago. So sometimes, yes, I would say there are poems that I get very emotional during, and there's some poems that I won't read because I know that they'll make me emotional.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah. Victoria, have you thought about this question?
Yeah, I was thinking about, watching people perform songs, and sometimes I wonder watching them, it's like, especially if they're older and the song's really old, that they're sort of known for, like, how do you still perform that over and over and over again, and how many thousands of times have you performed it and still capture the energy and the rawness of when they first wrote the song? That's a really great question. I know for me, when I first started reading these, and I remember when I was writing these poems, that I just remember like bawling and weeping But now I read them, I actually don't feel anything. So they're words, and I just read them, and it makes me kind of sad, but it also makes me happy because it means that the feelings aren't quite as raw anymore. So it's not necessarily like I don't hurt as much as I did when I wrote these, and so I don't think it's such a bad thing. And I'm a terrible performer. I think people who are, you know, like maybe like more a better readers of their work could probably fake it, but I probably can't do that. And so yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably a positive thing that you're not weeping when you're reading poems, that you were weeping when you were writing them. And that's really all. I don't really have an answer. That's really just what I was thinking about when Leila was talking. So, yeah.
I have an interesting, when I read that question, I had an interesting moment, because that kind of question always takes me back to very particular parts in poems that were very emotional, but it's not the emotion that you were feeling. To me, it's the province of being a writer. I have a very particular early poem called Nani, which is about my grandmother, what we called her. And in it, when I wrote it, just being a young writer, I wrote about her dying. And then she died. And I didn't mean that when I wrote it. I didn't expect it. I don't know what I was. I mean, it was just one of those things you write. It was so easy to write. It was so easy to have emotion as a young writer, that it helped me to understand after it happened that I hadn't begun to understand what that meant, and that words were not emotions. You know, it's something else bigger, far more profound. And it's not a cause and effect. I did not cause her to die, obviously. But something happened to me in that process that every time I read a question like this, I go right back to that moment and that line that I wrote. And I think how empty it was, even though when I wrote it, it seemed so dramatic and so full, and how it really wasn't. So it taught me something as a writer about the voyage of emotion, not simply the document of it.
Yeah. I feel like every time you reread an old poem, whether it's someone else's or yours, you're always reading it from this lens of where you are, you know, not where you were when you wrote it, when you read it, which is interesting, because you can have a different understanding like 50 times of the same poem.
Yeah, and I mean, to build on that too, I think it's no different than reading other people's poems. I mean, I've heard so many people say, for example, they didn't used to like Joy Graham, you know, when they were younger, but as they, you know, aged a little bit, suddenly they just loved Joy Graham or Bob Hass, you know, and I think, I mean, I'd hope that we're all growing and changing, which then changes how we view the world and how we read our own work. And I remember Bridget P. Jean Kelly, when I met her, was horrified about that first book that she wrote. And I was so excited to tell her I had found that first book, and she was horrified and mortified. And I think that's a great thing. You know, I think that means she grew as a writer, but also, you know, grew as a person. And I hope that, you know, all of us try to stay open, you know, throughout our lives to different ways of reading, and knowing that even if we may not understand something or we may dislike something, that maybe later we can learn to appreciate that kind of writing. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a really wonderful thing to feel like you're changing and growing, even your attitude towards your own work.
Definitely. I want to bring up this question from Kara, which is kind of, I guess, a follow-up question to what we've just been talking about. Do you have any recommendations about workshopping work that is tough to write personally? Like, what advice do you give to other MFAs in writing such things, work on it alone, or how to hold the space in a workshop? I feel like that's a good question because, you know, people get touchy about new work, you know, and it's like, on one level, yeah, like you want to honor that. And then on the other level, you're like, this is a piece of writing. Like, it's separate from the emotions that drove it. And I'm curious about how each of you approach that kind of thing. I'm going to remove this only because it's like blocking some of your faces.
Well, I think it starts off from like the first week of class, certainly building up trust within the classroom. That's a huge thing for me in workshop. I was a special education teacher before I became a writer. So I care a lot about classroom culture and sort of building just mutual respect before you do anything. I think that in order to learn, you have to feel safe, and there's a lot that goes into that. So establishing that sort of trust before you begin workshopping, I think, is very important, and doing that deliberately. And I often, when I have students that, I tell students if they're going to bring in work that they feel like might be emotional for them, to like maybe send a note to me in advance to let me know if this is something, they're still having some raw feelings about. And in some of my workshops, I lead them by asking students to tell us what kind of feedback they want, what kind of feedback they'll find useful. And if they feel that something is particularly, they're like just not in a mode to receive sort of critical feedback at this time, then just sort of like, here's what things are working, here are questions. And that's that. This is sort of allow students to sort of scaffold what they need at that moment. And then, to go back individually as their instructor when they're feeling, maybe that they can work on it a little bit more as a piece. But I think it can be really hard to do a whole group workshop on the piece that someone is feeling extremely charged about.
Definitely.
If you're talking about,
what would you say?
Oh.
I was going to ask you, Alberto. Your 35 years of teaching. I'm like, tell us.
It has come up more than once. Let's say that. And I think there are a lot of really useful techniques, as Leila was saying. I think it depends on the student and on the trust you've built up in a class. And it depends on how much a student wants to work at this and how serious they are about it. So the lighter approach to this that I think is very effective, and it comes out of, we won't say where it all comes out of. We don't need to use some faux psychology, but one very effective technique is to turn it into third person and let the observer not be the center of it all and write about that person. And it's an act of freedom that allows you to find some objectivity where none seems to be. And I think that's one really good technique. A deeper technique that I find produces astonishing results is to take the piece of writing and then have the student write the direct opposite of it, every single word. And to find out what is also there, what is the photographic negative of that piece of emotional writing. And to find out where it sends you is so often far more interesting than the dire moment we seem to be exhibiting right then and there. We are suddenly, as writers, as thinkers, we are suddenly led by that moment of crisis rather than being crushed by it. And I think that ends up being a wonderful examination. So if you start by saying, I love my mother, well, you can imagine the opposite of that. First thing it says to you is, I don't want to say that. Well, this is a poem. This is not about, you can say it in this poem and see where it goes. And suddenly, when you put the things you do not want to say next to the things you want to say, that's the emotional moment. And it is suddenly, a wrestling match. What's stronger? What I don't want to say, what I do want to say. Then does it become dishonest? No, because it's coming directly from what you said. Directly from what you said. It is also the poem that is there. And I find that to be a very exciting workshop process. Those are just two. There's others.
No, I love that. Yeah. Definitely. Victoria, do you have anything you wanted to add?
I mean, I'm reading the question again. I think if from the perspective of a writer, I think that you just trust your instinct. I mean, who you trust right away. And if, and I mean, I think in a workshop, you always find one person you trust. And so if you're not comfortable, hopefully, if you're not comfortable, I think I always tell people to find your people and email your people after. And if you're not comfortable bringing it into workshop, because workshop though can feel really brutal to the individual being workshopped, it often doesn't feel that way to other people because they're, it's not about themselves. And so I do think, oh, there are my wiener dogs barking. I'm sorry. But but yeah, I mean, I always just say, you just know, if you're not, like, if you're asking that question, you're probably uncomfortable still. And if you're comfortable taking the risk, go for it. But it's not like a one or none, it's not binary. There are a lot of other ways to get feedback on difficult work, before you bring it into workshop. And you don't even have to. I mean, you can also just email it to the teacher and ask the teacher to look at it or something like that. I mean, I think there are just a lot of different ways that you can approach that. That's really what I would say.
It's important to have students understand as well as that they don't have to show everything to everybody. And the first impulse, because we're writers in a writing workshop, is we have to show everything. It's not true. And sometimes you need to go into a place where you have to write things you can't show, don't want to show. You have no business showing it. And it's not that that's going to become your art. That's your feeling. That's your something else. But it's not necessarily your art.
Or it might be art you need to sit on for a little bit until
which will change it. It'll turn into wine.
Love it.
Student, I'm like taking really strong mental notes.
All right, I'm gonna bring up, I think, our final audience question. Thank you for the beautiful readings. This is a question for Leila. In your poems, there's a move between the seeming constants of a woman, from a woman to be to a woman who is, or one who is not, because of some expectation. How do you conceive these moves, and how do you replicate it for, if one can call it that, the persona of God?
My, what a question for this hour. Wow, okay.
I like to end it on like a really light note. So.
I was thinking a lot about women and women generally, and what it meant to be a woman, and what it meant for me to be a woman, because so much of my experience was like put in those terms. My illness was like a female illness, and like the poems I was writing were female poems, and the shame I felt was a female shame. And so I was trying to really understand where I felt in this like lineage of women. And I was very young when I got sick. I was 22, and so I'd only just started to even claim that word for myself. And so I had to do sort of all this thinking about, since I had this faith background, and there's certain rules and expectations of women that are different. Like, when did those rules kick in? And for me and my faith, it kicked in at this onset of menstruation. And so always it was around blood. So as I'm writing about this blood, I had to think immediately of gender, and thinking immediately of like womanhood. Those things could not be separated in my experience. And so I don't know, I was interested, the more I thought about my own womanhood and how I came to be that way, and what I was before, and kind of wishing for this earlier time where I was almost without sin because I couldn't really be held accountable. And so this, kind of coming into the body of a woman meant coming into the place of punishment. And then I started to think about the other women around me, how women generally were being treated, and then the women of my faith and of the stories of my faith, which led me to think a lot about Mary, and thinking about, she's the only woman named in the Quran, so for me she was a big figure, but never really did we really talk about the fact that she was a woman, like what it meant for her to be a woman specifically, and not just like the idea of a woman. And so I wanted to know, like, what was childbirth like for her, and what was it like when her body changed, and what was it like to have her son taken from her. I wanted to know the woman experiences that are common across time, and that sort of bound me in my agencylessness to Mary, if Mary was a real woman, as I'm led to believe, supposed to believe. So I don't know if that answers that question exactly, but just sort of I really wanted to think about I don't know, the things beneath the things. Like, I knew sort of like how I was meant to behave, but then I had to question, like, the whole premise of the book for me is that I was punished, and that I was, then I have to be like, why was I punished? And also, what is wrong with me that led me to believe that, when I think there's probably 100 other women that would be sick with the same thing and not think they were struck down by God. So I needed to think about what messages had I been consuming for so long, from where, to make me think that, oh, I'm sick, therefore I am bad, and I am bad because I am female, and something I have done is wrong. So I really needed to sort of investigate womanhood for myself.
Excellent answer. I think that answered the question kind of perfectly, like surprisingly well, given, the time that you had to read it and the intricacies of it. So bravo, Leila. This has been so much fun. This is my social life right now, It's great to hang out with all of you and chat with all of you. You're all so talented and so smart. And, how many people can you really talk poems with,
Yeah, that's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's far away, too.
Yeah. So this has been just really wonderful and meaningful to me. I thought we could maybe close. I know that a couple people had posed questions. I think like one of our interns and maybe somebody on the comments earlier about books you would recommend. And I'm curious if you guys have recommendations for any, emerging poets that you've read recently, or just something that you've read recently that you thought was wonderful that you might recommend to our audience. Alberto?
Yeah, I think the one I read most recently that I was excited about is a young writer named Jacqueline Balderrama, Balderrama. And I think her book is called Now in Color by Perugia Press. And what I love about what Jackie is doing is she's at the beginning of something I recognize, a search for identity, how it coincides with place, and what all of that means to the personal life of somebody. We tend to think of our lives in terms of being poets or whatever, but she's got a regular life and is interested in a lot of things. And so I really like the initialness of the starting of the voyage. So that's the one I would recommend.
Cool. Victoria, do you have anyone you want to recommend to us?
Gosh, there's so many. It's the question is the one I'm thinking of. It's the one that asked for emerging poets that are also BIPOC writers. There's so many. I mean, Jake Skeets wrote a fantastic first book. Marian Chan has a new book out from Saraban Books. William Evans, We Inherit What the Fires Left, is sitting on my table. Justin Philip Reed has second book out that I haven't read yet, but I loved the first book. Javier Zamora. I know Eduardo Correa has a new book coming out in the fall. Hardly emerging, but there's so many wonderful, wonderful writers right now. I could go on and for like another 20 minutes, but I'll stop.
Thank
Eduardo,
you.
Force of Nature.
I know. I was so happy to see your name in the comments, Eduardo. Leila, who would you recommend for us?
There are so many good books. So I would say Philip Matthews' book Witch, which is out in Alice James, came out in April. Really love that book. It's very mysterious and magical to me, unlike anything really I've read. Sunita Chakraborty's book is coming out very soon. Also Alice James, it's going to be very good. Jameson Fitzpatrick's Kids in the Tapestry. That's great. Beautiful. Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
Also Joy Priest's Horsepower, and I would say Ben Garcia's Thrown in the Throat. Horsepower is coming out from Pitt, and Thrown in the Throat, some milkweed. I would recommend those.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. I have a really long reading list right now. Or not long, but perfectly length. All right, y'all. This has been really fun. Thank you all so much for watching. This is just so lovely. It just makes me feel better. And I hope you all feel that way as well. Mwah. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Bye. Thank you. Mwah. Bye, Jackie. I love you.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah.